Over the past 2 days, we've been hearing about fermentation technology, cultivated or cultured meat, eggs, and dairy. We've been hearing about novel processing techniques for texturization, et cetera. On the plant-based side of things, we've been hearing about the need for regulators to enable this ecosystem so that more corporates, for-profit players, startups can get their products to market faster, right? We've heard about how countries like Singapore and Israel have taken a big leap in terms of, so for example, I was in Singapore recently. On Thursdays, you can order cultivated meat just like you order food from Zomato and Swiggy, and you have it. It's as simple as that, and that country has enabled all the regulatory aspects, which just goes on to show if people come together and put up progressive regulatory policies, things are easy for the industry to really get the products out in the market. So let's learn how the regulatory ecosystem in India can play a pivotal role in enhancing the ease of doing business and new innovation and shape consumer perception about smart protein products. That's another thing, right? Food safety, how people perceive products, usually starts with policy and regulatory environment. So let's see how these particularly new and innovative categories can be really accelerated by transformative regulatory pathways. And let me introduce our policy specialist for regulatory, Astha Gaur, to take up the stage so that she can moderate the next session. Let's have a round of applause for our guests as well. First up, I'd invite Abhinav Singh to join the stage from FICCI. Abhinav is the head of FICCI, Food Processing Division and Confederation of Indian Food Trade and Industry, CIFTI FICCI. Mr. Abhinav Singh has been associated with FICCI for 14 years. He's a management professional with 17+ years of experience in policy advocacy, government affairs, building strategic partnerships, business and trade development, fundraising, and Abhinav has a deep understanding of the Indian food processing ecosystem and works very closely with senior stakeholders from the government and industry. He advises food processing companies in formulating growth strategies, the Indian food regulation framework, market access internationally, and also international outreach. He has been responsible for the FICCI Center of Nutrition Excellence, FCNE, and is responsible for driving the nutrition agenda for FICCI. He is a member on many critical government committees and task force, and also provides valuable policy inputs to central government and various state governments and embassies in India. Welcome, Abhinav. Next up, we have Mr. Jasvir Singh from IFF. Can I please invite you on the stage? That's our second moderator for the day. Let's have a round of applause for Mr. Jasvir Singh. Dr. Jasvir Singh is the lead regulatory and scientific and government affairs at IFF. Dr. Jasvir Singh obtained his master's degree in microbiology from Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar, following a doctorate in Biochemical Engineering and Research and Process Development Center, Institute of Microbial Technology, Chandigarh. He's currently working with International Flavors and Fragrances, IFF, as regulatory, scientific, and government affairs lead for South Asia. Prior to this, he's worked in areas of quality, food safety, regulatory affairs with organizations like Mondelez, Cadbury, ITC, SGS, Food Research and Analysis Center, and Jeet Industries. He's also provided his expertise in laboratory quality management systems to the government of Vietnam as a technical expert for FAO. Really glad to have you with us. Next up, we have Vikram Jeet Singh from BTG Legal. Vikram, can I invite you on the stage? So let's have a round of applause for Vikram. Vikramjeet Singh leads and heads the digital business and retail practice of BTG Legal, New Delhi. Vikram has more than 18 years of experience in corporate commercial advisory, particularly in the digital business and online retail spaces. He is a sector specialist in laws related to consumer liability, product liability, health and safety, and e-commerce. As a part of his sector focus, Vikram advises on Indian food laws, including those related to importing, manufacture, and sale of novel foods. Vikram is experienced in advising on issues relating to food laws, including food labeling, health claims, advertising, and novel foods. With that, I'll let Astha, our policy specialist, regulatory, who's been doing excellent work within policy, to shape all of this, to take up with the session.
Thank you so much, Shardul. So everyone, welcome to the first panel of day 2 of the Smart Protein Summit 2022. I hope you had a great day 1, full of insights and takeaways. And during a lot of discussions and panels on day 1, the regulatory pathways for these particular products, for the smart protein products, kept coming up. So that is the discussion we are going to have today. With the rise of innovative technologies, the regulatory framework for bringing these products to market will play a pivotal role in promoting ease of doing business and consumer acceptability of smart protein products. Several countries globally are looking at their regulatory landscape and analyzing where it needs to be updated to accommodate for the innovation that smart protein products require, and where it needs to be updated to account for it. Our discussion today will focus on envisioning a regulatory roadmap for a clear path to market for smart protein products in India. Governments and policy specialists are analyzing the potential of smart protein, particularly the newer categories of smart protein, which are cultivated and fermentation technology, to achieve food security and sustainably feed the growing population. Regulatory bodies such as Singapore Food Agency, SFA, have already built a regulatory framework, as Shardul just mentioned, and other countries are also having discussions to make these products available in the market. Additionally, Codex Alimentarius Commission, which is a body jointly set up by FAO and WHO, is also looking to understand and possibly standardize these categories. GFI has also been granted an observer status in Codex Alimentarius Commission and has been working closely with the body to set standards for emerging food categories. Today, we are looking to have a conversation to explore some of these issues to build a progressive regulatory ecosystem. GFI India has been conducting various discussions, various sessions, and it has also been discussed in roundtables, which are focused on building knowledge, and many of these questions have come up already. We have a fantastic set of panelists today that bring deep expertise across regulatory affairs, policy advisory, as well as legal compliance. And we look forward to having a very productive discussion with them. With their collective experience and wisdom, I'm sure we will have great takeaways on how we can establish a clear regulatory roadmap for smart protein products in India. Along with that, with their knowledge as well as with their connected voices in the industry, we hope to demystify some of these things that we have been discussing on building regulatory pathways going forward, because we appreciate that building a regulatory pathway for any product is not a one-day process. It's about collaboration, it's about discussion, knowledge exchange, and that is what we are here to do today. So without further ado, I'm going to start with a set of questions for all the panelists today on what they do and what they do with smart protein products. I'm just going to start with Dr. Jasvir. Dr. Jasvir, as the Regulatory, Scientific and Government Affairs Lead at International Flavors and Fragrances and the Chair of Codex Cell at FICCI, you have a deep regulatory experience on Indian and international regulatory frameworks. Can you shed some light on how the policy and regulatory framework has been evolving internationally for these categories?
Hi. Thanks, Astha. So one thing that we need to understand that the regulations also have a life cycle. They have a journey which they go through from a starting point to a phase where they mature, and then ultimately they lead to or reach a stage where the understanding on those regulations become the same across stakeholders. Now, this sector is at a very nascent stage, and hence you do find a lot of variations at the maturity level of regulations across geographies. So there are countries which have really reached the level that they can do a safety assessment and actually give you a regulatory go-ahead to market a product. There are countries which are still discussing on how to evaluate these aspects related to safety, communication, etc. And there are countries which are in between these two extremes. So on one hand, you have a country like Singapore, which has already given a go-ahead. On the other hand, you have countries like India where discussions have started. Now, that's about the regulatory framework maturity. But as far as the basic framework is concerned, so these products will either come from, and if I look at the entire gamut of products being talked about under this smart proteins arena, some of these products are pretty much conventional products, like things which where you are using soya protein or protein from some other vegetable sources, and convert them into a product which are again conventional products. So those regulatory pathways are well established, pretty much straightforward, well understood across geographies. I think there would be hardly any geography or a country regulator which is not able to deal with those areas. The challenge is really coming from the newer areas of scientific developments, things like where you have cultivated meat, which were products or materials not present in the food supply chain in many countries so far. And hence, those regulators need to understand various dimensions associated with it, and they will take a bit of time around to build that understanding. I hope.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jasvir. We will come back to all the points that you just mentioned, but we are so glad to have you here in this panel, and we hope to gain a lot from your regulatory expertise. Thank you. Moving on to you, Vikram. Talking about in India, India has seen a lot of developments on the regulatory front, and in fact, on 11th October, the non-specified food amendment regulation was finally published by the FICCI. You have been working with the companies as well as advising the government bodies and other departments in building policy pathways for emerging technologies. How do you see the legal framework of these products evolving in India?
Thank you, Astha, and great to be here. I think the legal framework is evolving. It's necessarily a slow process because what we're dealing with here is not the usual run-of-the-mill food products that a regulator has to handle. So, I mean, just as a primer on food regulations, I mean, you need a license to manufacture or sell food in whatever form in India. There are certain defined food categories and food groups. So, for instance, if you want to sell pulses or edible oils, there is a standard for that already. Everybody knows what a pulse and a rice is. Everybody knows what edible oils are. And then you have to go get a license for that particular category. The trouble with, not the trouble, the nuance with, something like plant-based meat substitute is that it's not defined regulatorily anywhere, and it's difficult to define. It's something that essentially, you have to test out for the market before you can allow it. So after 2015, the government has come up with the 2017 non-specified food regulations, and they basically say that, you have to essentially come to us, give us, details of what you want to market, how you want to market it, what are the benefits. And like you said, on 11th October, it was actually amended to add more timelines. They also gave guidance that, if this food is allowed in another country, please tell us about that. So it's a slow path to market because for novel foods, for non-specified foods, you have to go to the government and get an approval every single time. The idea being that these are not food groups, these are not food items that are regularly consumed by humans. So you have to protect the consumer from that perspective. But the regulations moving forward, I think one heartening thing that happened in June of this year was that the vegan food regulations were also notified. And you now at least have a steer on what is a vegan food. What is the process to be followed if you want to market a vegan food. They've even designated a V symbol for vegan food. So these are all moves forward, but because of the nature of the product that we are all espousing and selling here, this will be a look before you leap process from the regulator.
Thank you so much, Vikram. And just to let everyone know, Vikram is a part of a regulatory advisory council, which we have in GFI India, which provides focused regulatory advice to the companies through knowledge sessions, webinars, and one-on-one sessions as well. Thanks, Vikram. Coming to you, Abhinav. As the head of CIFTI, FICCI, you work closely with companies and have an insight into the growth of the smart protein sector in India. The Center of Excellence that FICCI and GFI India will be setting up, amongst other things, will advocate for a simplified path to market for the smart protein products. Can you share the initiatives planned under the COE to simplify the regulatory pathways for the smart protein products?
Thank you so much, Astha. First of all, I'd like to brief everyone in the audience today that why we came up with this idea of Center for Excellence. So I've been associated with Varun Deshpande, GFI, for last 5 years. And of late, last 2 years, I've been interacting with a lot of startups also. And we realized that there's a lot of gap in terms of the knowledge which is required for the sector to grow. No doubt, the government is supporting the sector very much. DST, BIRAC, and other government bodies, a lot of academic bodies are supporting it with a lot of scientific research happening around there. But still, the hand-holding part was missing. That's how the idea came up to have a one center of excellence for smart protein sector, which can work as a nodal framework, nodal agency, or nodal, you can say nodal house, wherein all the information can be provided at one place and regulatory for that matter, very particularly, because a lot of the time they do not get the right food safety FSSAI regulations, and often there is you will see lack in labeling, claims, what kind of ingredients to be used. So there is some discrepancy in between. So that's how this Center for Excellence will work as a focused framework, which will have all the information required. Anyone can access it. Anyone can reach out to secretariat at the Center for Excellence, and that will pave way for this. Apart from this, we also plan to have an expert working group, which will comprise experts from across the sector. Food processing, especially from the smart protein sector, also a lot of budding startups. It will have some regulator also. It will have some sectoral experts also. And that's how we will try to bring a one kind of holistic approach, and right kind of statement or right kind of policy advocacy can be done for this sector. And say, for example, many times, maybe going future, if they need to create any kind of new category, so the standard setting process, which we generally do in regular basis at FICCI, we advocate with the food processing sector, with the FSSAI. We draft the regulations. We propose this regulation to the FSSAI. We do consultation around that. So any other categories need to be brought in with that we can take it through this Center for Excellence. That's the one thing. Apart from this, we also plan to do time-to-time regulatory consultation for this sector. So wherein it could be regional, it could be at the central level, where we go and reach out to some regional places like Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, and get all the startups together and tell them how the current regulatory framework is. It will talk about the FSSAI regulation. It will also talk about the legal methodology, which is also a very important aspect. Many times I've seen many of the food products which are available in the smart protein category, they are not complying with the legal methodology rules at times, right? So there has to be clear communication, clear understanding, so that will be help. So this kind of thing, apart from this annual summit will be part of the Center for Excellence as well. In future, we're going to do this. So this is some of the activities we plan. And as we move forward, I'm hopeful that we will have more new ideas, more new ways to support this sector under the Center for Excellence.
Thank you so much, Abhinav. And like Abhinav mentioned, we have had a long-standing, ongoing collaboration with FICCI, and the Center of Excellence is just the next logical step to advance the smart protein sector in India through relationship building, discussions, knowledge exchange, to advance the policy and regulatory pathways. Thank you so much, everyone, and let's dive right in now. Dr. Jasvir, I'm going to come back to you for the next question. With technological advancements happening every day, the regulatory framework for the smart protein sector will have to be dynamic, adaptive, and collaborative. How can we look at the best regulatory practices internationally by engaging a broader set of players across the ecosystem and imbibing those learnings? And what global best practices can be efficiently transferred to the Indian framework to address the key challenges in India?
Yeah, so as this area is pretty nascent and Indian regulatory framework is just now starting to do some action around building its own understanding of this product lines, the processes, the supply chain, and what they need to do about it. It is always good. And if I look at last 15 years of my life as a regulatory professional, the one word that I have used the most is harmonization. So harmonization is one word that the Indian regulatory framework need to keep in mind. If we build frameworks which are isolated from rest of the world, we are only going to create problems for the sector. Whether it is for their ability to market their products locally or globally, it's a problematic area. So harmonization to the best extent possible is the way forward if India is looking to build its regulatory framework. That's one area. The other area is looking at the principles, because we all know that there are variations from country to country in terms of consumer understanding, in terms of the maturity of the society, and society is an important stakeholder in this whole regulatory framework. Because of those variations, there will be some differences. You will not have harmonization ending up as a copy-paste of somebody else's framework. The framework has to develop locally, addressing some of the specific local needs. So look at the principles. And what are those principles that we should look at? The first is the role of that regulation. What do we expect out of that regulation, or what do we want that regulation to do? The outcome that we expect from the regulation should be clear before we set it out. Because what happens, at times, it's a very loosely directed regulation which ends up doing more harm than good. So if we are clear about the end objective, we'll be good in terms of drafting and looking at various aspects. The other is certain aspects like as an industry, what do we expect out of a regulation? The regulation should be clear, simple, predictable. I mean, when I say predictable, that means that I should be having that confidence that if I generate this data, the regulator is going to approve my product. The processes should be predictable. The outcome should be predictable if the input is right. So that predictability should be there in the regulatory frameworks. The other is the clarity. Where does my product fall in? And for that category, what do I need to do to ensure compliance? That clarity around what constitutes compliance, if we can build into regulatory frameworks, that's another area which we must look at and strengthen. And the third is the predictable risk assessment frameworks. Now, risk assessment or risk analysis, if I look at the macro level view, it broadly has two components. One is the scientific aspects, where you look at whether a material is safe, not safe, and those are well-established scientific principles. The other is your local level exposure of that material to population, and basis that you take a calculated view of what kind of exposure should be allowed. So the scientific part, at least that can be something which is well harmonized across countries, because you won't have variations in science at least. So that can be taken. You build in your local level exposure and then come to the levels of safety that you really want to have. And I think with that, at least broadly, we will have a framework which enables the sector to grow. At the same time, it ensures safety for the consumers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jasvir. And just to add to what Dr. Jasvir just spoke about, there are certain international best practices that India could borrow from, such as FRESH, which is in Singapore, and which is a collaborative sort of initiative by NTU, which is the Nanyang Technological University, the regulator, as well as A-STAR, which creates safety analysis database, which can then be utilized by the industry and by other players as well. And it feeds into, it educates the regulator, and it feeds into the regulatory framework. So we want more collaborative ventures in India as well, which, because we appreciate that for the regulator as well as for the industry and all the stakeholders, this is a very nascent category, especially the newer categories of smart protein, which are fermentation derived and cultivated. And we need to have those ongoing discussions and work collaboratively to, over time, build policy and regulatory pathways, and they cannot be done in a day. We do appreciate the regulator's task, and we are grateful for all that FSSAI has been doing to advance the food safety sector in India, and of course to deliver sustainable foods to the consumers. For any new food category, besides having a clear regulatory framework, food regulatory authorities can also play a major role in building consumer confidence and category awareness. Consumer awareness and understanding of smart protein will play a fundamental role in increasing consumer acceptability of these proteins. Abhinav, can you highlight the regulator's potential role in this type of communication that talks about the concerns that consumers otherwise might have with newer food categories such as these?
Thank you so much, Astha. That's quite a very relevant question and rightly put. As we all know that we are looking at the sector which is at a very nascent stage, regulators can play a very small role, it's a very big role, and not only regulator. I think many stakeholders from the sector will need to come together. There is need to create awareness about this uprising segment, what are its positives, how it can be, and obviously we need to link it with sustainability and the environment. That's a big target for the government of India as well. Having said that, we can look at having a resource center. We will urge going forward if FICCI can put up some kind of FAQs or reference document on their website, like they do for other categories, can you put up? But I would say, apart from FSSAI, other government body like Ministry of Food Processing Industry, which acts as the parent ministry for the sector, also need to come forward. And all the stake associations like us, private companies, and government regulators, they all need to come forward. But before I divulge much into it, I would like to add to what Dr. Jasvir said in the beginning. Since the session is on regulatory path to market, so what actually we are looking at? We are looking at the market access. Now, there comes a very strong rational point of harmonization of standard, which Dr. Jasvir very clearly brought out. And why this is important? Because when you go to the global level, there you need some backing of some data and scientific facts. And there, the harmonization standard is important because then the trade becomes easy for everyone, right? And I give you a small example. Recently, in the month of February, March, when we were doing Dubai Expo, and there we celebrated Millet Food Festival. And I did interact with many foreign country representatives, and they were like, you are promoting millets from the India perspective to the global world, but what are the data to claim that they are, how nutritious they are? So which is actually lacking at this point of time, right? So millet is also a plant-based as one of the category of what we are advocating here for. But there has to be substantial data to prove what we are claiming, especially when you go for the global market. Same will happen with the plant-based alternative product, cultivated or fermented, whatever it is. Whatever claim we are making, it has to be backed up by strong scientific data and consumer research. So that would be, I think, would be very, very important. And that's how, because India, we are trying to establish it as a food basket to the world. And I'm sure the smart protein sector has a huge capacity and potential in future to cater to that need of other countries. So I think that's very important also.
Thank you so much, Abhinav. And that's a very valid point, and we're just going to come back to that. I have a follow-up question for Dr. Jasvir on that particular point. But before that, very quickly, Vikram, labeling particularly plays a very important part in clearly and effectively communicating the primary characteristics of the products to the consumer, apart from other sort of guidance documents that the regulatory bodies can provide. And regulatory bodies such as, coming back to the Singapore example again, as well as the European regulatory body, SFA and EFSA, they do have guidance documents to guide the consumers. On the labeling aspect, would you say that appropriate labeling of these food products will play an essential role in building consumer confidence?
Absolutely. I think labeling is the second leg of, ensuring consumer benefit. The first one, of course, is safety testing. The second one is, proper labeling and consumer education, just to make sure that the consumer is, properly aware of what he or she is buying. Especially in a country like India, where you have various languages, you have various, religious preferences, dietary preferences. You might even have, unlettered consumers who are buying the product. So in a country like India, labeling, and not just labeling in terms of the text of the labeling, but also symbols and other packaging are very important. Once again, FSSAI has come up with labeling regulations, quite a while ago. You've all seen it on, your prepackaged food, the quantity, batch number, manufacturing. In recent times, for food products, they have to disclose calorie content as well. So there has been, a fairly fertile environment for labeling regulation in India. It's one of the, bigger roles of the FSSAI to, regulate and enforce labeling standards. I think you might remember that earlier this year, there was some crackdown on edible oils, mixing of edible oils, and so the FSSAI keeps an eye on, what sort of labeling you use. Globally as well, there have been initiatives. There have been, a bit of fit and start on this, because some of the progress has been made by courts as well. So for instance, in Europe, courts have ruled that you cannot use things like cream and milk when you, are using it for novel foods, because let's say if you are using a dairy derived meat substitute, you can't call it dairy. Similarly, countries, depending on their own regulatory and cultural backgrounds, have come up with solutions. So in some cases, if there is a sensorial equivalent to meat, you can call something sausage-like or salami-like. But I think labeling is one area in which one size fits all will not apply. You'll have to look at national, and even in a place like India, regional variations, because what might work for one part of India may not work for another part of India. So I think once again, this is an area in which you just cannot, legislate and prescribe a certain set of standards, because once again, this is not something that has an historical, much historical background or precedence. You have to go on a case-to-case basis, and you have to basically keep in mind the idea of not misleading consumers. I think that's essentially, consumer not having a misleading label out there is, what will, I think, drive the regulatory outlook when it comes to labeling.
Precisely. I absolutely agree with what Vikram has said. And I think for everyone, all the entrepreneurs who are working in this particular sector, that is the primary sort of consideration as well. None of the entrepreneurs would want to put on a label which does not clearly communicate to the consumer what the product is, because this product is in the market for a particular reason, and that is to provide an alternative for a conventional product which has existed in the market for a long time. I do believe, of course, that the labeling regulations which are in place, they are adequate, they are sufficient to provide guidance on how to label your products. And on nomenclature, that is something which Dr. Jasvir's point, coming back to the harmonization, I think harmonizing internationally, globally on the nomenclature for the newer categories would be relevant as well. And my next question is to you, Dr. Jasvir. For the emerging food categories, such as cultivated meat or precision fermentation, for example, which do not have a very clear, well-rounded regulatory pathway right now, that, as you pointed out, there is a need to build capacity in food safety from the industry side, and for the regulator to adopt a bottom-up approach to ensure a smoother compliance process. How can we build a pipeline of trained professionals in food safety, as well as get data on food safety for non-specified foods or novel foods?
That has been one of my favorite topics that I keep on talking about, which is the lack of risk assessment capabilities within India. And that's a national gap that we have. Unfortunately, we have not been able to address it even after all these years. The gap has been well recognized at many levels, but the real action, at least in the area of food sciences, has not happened. Now, when I say risk assessment capabilities, what do I mean? See, risk analysis at a broad level, they have three components. The first is risk assessment, the other is risk management, the third one is risk communication. Now, if you look at risk assessment, it actually involves three components. One is that how do you identify what is the risk? Then how do you characterize that risk? And then how do you quantify that? So those are broadly the areas where you look at and here one very fine distinction needs to be made between risk and a hazard. Now, what's the difference? Now, hazard is there in most of the things that we do in life. Even if we walk out of the hotel on the road, that involves a risk. Somebody else can hit us while we are walking on the road. That is a hazard which is present there. But is it a risk? That's the understanding that we need to build. It's not a risk if we walk carefully. It is not a risk if the other drivers drive carefully, right? But it is a risk if we don't walk carefully or the other drivers do not drive carefully, right? So the same situation can present a risk or may not present a risk while the hazard is still there, right? So that understanding that when do you move into regulating a particular hazard, and that scenario happens only when there's an appreciable risk which is involved in some situation that you need to control. I mean, for example, and that brings me to the other area, which is framing the right questions, which need to be answered. I mean, if you are looking at, say, cultivated meat, now, is this the right question that this cultivated meat is safe? Or we should be looking at, is this cultivated meat as safe as its non-cultivated counterpart? Because that is being consumed by the population in any case. So if that is safe, and this is as safe as that, that means we have a broad level of safety which the society can accept. Right? So these are the capabilities, and this requires that capability around risk assessment and choosing the right risk management option. And this is where we still need to work a lot, and probably GFI can anchor that sort of discussions going forward and build a broad level understanding and support from various stakeholders, whether it is from industry or from the regulatory authorities or from the government bodies who can probably fund these, that we need to have national level risk assessment centers whose output or whose scientific opinions are respected by everybody because of the credibility which they bring with those scientific opinions. So some of that work has started at some level, like NIFTM has set up a risk assessment center, but just very initial stages. Some other people may be considering about that, but that's an area which we really need to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jasvir, for very articulately explaining the entire risk assessment and risk analysis process, as well as providing us guidance on what we can do next. We have definitely taken that on board, and GFI will collaborate with the relevant and key stakeholders within the ecosystem to take this forward. Thank you very much for that. Very quickly, Abhinav, coming back to you. Industry associations play an integral role in providing a platform for companies to voice their concerns and represent them to the regulatory body. What are some of the key regulatory challenges that are being faced by smart protein companies as you see it, and how can they be addressed?
Well, most of the challenges have already been discussed by Dr. Jasvir, Mr. Vikram, and also in the previous session by Dr. Sir. But I would say for the smart voting sector, this novel regulation is the implementation will be a tricky one, especially for the cultivated meat sector, because can be scrutiny for the labeling and for the ingredient. There has to be human safe consumption study need to be provided, which might take some more time. Time in the sense it could be, if you want to launch a product in the market, it may take up to 1.5 to 2 years of time. And it's not only time, it's also the cost implication. It can go into 4 to 5 lakhs rupees for per risk assessment kind of thing. So that would be a challenge. But for otherwise, for general plant-based foods, the fermented foods, the general time frame 4 to 6 months is, I think, reasonable. I mean, it takes that amount of time. That is one. I think that is the main thing in totality. The consumer perception, which we were talking about, will also play a very key role, because unless the consumer is convinced about the segment, the market will not take off. Right. So having a right stand of consumer awareness, I mean, we can ask ourselves how many of us in the room or how many of our friends or relatives are consuming the plant-based food products? And the answer, we can get it very easily, right? So there has need to be more positive vibes about the sector, but it has to be backed up by nutritional values. You know, it has to be nutritious as the conventional mode of products which are available in the market. So there we need to work on and texture and quality. So there is more about consuming the communicating with the consumer on the positive side. So that will play a very big role in driving the sector going forward.
Thank you so much, Abhinav. You've brought forth some very, very relevant points, and I completely agree that consumer perception would play a huge role. We do see, of course, you see it as much as we do, that this sector is taking off a lot in India, and we see a lot of consumers getting aware of this product more and more every day.
And I think what the more confidence gives to this uprising sector is the coming of the big corporates. Many of them over member companies like ITC has forayed into it, Tata has got it, now Lysias is also getting it. And some of the companies are considering getting into, they are exploring their options. It may be some announcement coming up in few months down the line, but more companies are getting into this space. That shows that the sector has huge potential to capture in this growing market because we have a very strong consumer base. We have a very strong, great population, large number of population, and everyone wants to capture this. At the end of the day, the commercials is what makes most of the sense for everyone into the business line.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for those insights, Abhinav. Any new industry will have to deal with an unfamiliar framework and thus will have a period of adjustment until the feedback loops driven by international developments and domestic industry and consumer preferences are in motion. Dr. Jasvir, my question to you is, how can we build industry capacity within this growing sector to navigate regulatory changes?
I think if I have to give one word answer for that, is the only word that comes to my mind is collaborate. Be part of platforms like GFI's group, which is working on regulations. If you do not have understanding of certain areas, aspects of regulations, there's a group which is more than willing to support each other to build those understanding. So that's at a collective level. But at an individual organization level, I think your engagement with the regulator is also something which is important. And that's a weakness that I have seen in my career, that if we look at any regulation, and to be fair to the regulator, they always put it up for public comments for 60 days around that period. But there's hardly any comments from industry, except few of the regular organizations like FICCI, CII, and these are the people who give comments. But industry's participation in that, in giving their feedback, sharing their views and pains around that, is still something where a lot more needs to be done. So I think your collaboration both as a group with each other to build capabilities and capacities, and your collaboration with the regulator to share your pain points, to share your realities, would go a long way in bringing everybody to the same level of understanding. See, the regulator and regulators depend a lot on the scientific panels. Members of the scientific panels are not employees of the regulator. They come from various academic institutes. Now, those people, their engagement with industry is extremely limited. Their understanding of the industrial processes is extremely limited. So it's a responsibility that we have for our own good to engage with the outside world, educate them on what we do, what are the best practices that we follow, so that they also get that degree of confidence in believing when we say that we sell safe products. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jasvir. This was exactly the point that I was coming to next, which is the only way to take policy and regulatory pathways forward and advance them is to work collectively and collaboratively. especially for the entrepreneurs, the startups, the companies in this sector, it is essential that you participate in the entire procedure for setting regulatory pathways for the smart protein sector. And GFI India provides constant, GFI India engages with the regulatory body, which is the FICCI, continuously, as well as provides comments and feedback on the regulations like Dr. Jasvir mentioned. We did that for the non-specified food regulation amendment, which came out last year in 2021. We did that for the vegan food regulations and other regulations which affect this particular sector as well. So anytime you have any comment for the regulator, any feedback, any concern that you have, please feel free to approach the regulatory team in GFI India, and we will be able to take that forward, because it is essential that the startups, even though you might have limited capacity right now, it's essential that you participate in this process, because regulatory is what will take the products to the market. And the regulator plays a very crucial role in making the consumers aware, in building consumer confidence in newer categories, innovative categories. Having said all that I did, I'm going to come down to one last fun question that I have. While we know that there is no one thing that can be done to advance regulatory pathways, it is going to be an ongoing process. It is going to be a continuous process of knowledge sharing, of collaboration, of exchange of ideas with the regulator, the academic professionals, the scientific professionals, the industry professionals, and all of that. But all that being said, just to end the panel, to all the panelists, I have a question. According to you, what is that one regulatory development which will significantly change the regulatory landscape? Just very quickly, on what do you think that, what could be that one regulatory development which will just transform the landscape? And I know that's not possible, but just wishful thinking. We can start with Dr. Jasvir, Abhinav, and then Vikram.
Okay. If I have to pick one thing that if we do right and things will be really transformed, it is to include impact analysis in the regulatory development process. But what it means is that when you are developing a regulation, you do an impact analysis on how that regulation is going to impact those who are being regulated by that, and then take into consideration what are the outcomes of that impact analysis, and then choose the right way forward.
Abhinav, over to you.
I think that was quite a very valid point Dr. Jasvir raised. But I would say what Dr. Jasvir said in his earlier points, that the consistency in the regulatory body is also play a very, very key role. What we have been realized over the years that as he mentioned, that members of the scientific panel, they are not getting chance to interact with the industry stakeholders. So sometimes a lot of these regulations are being framed up at a different silos on their own. If there is some mechanism in the FSSAI where all of the stakeholders can come together before bringing a regulation, because once a regulation is out for draft or public comments, it's become very difficult for government also to make amendments or take it back. So I think there has to be consistency in the body, and not only at the scientific panel level, but also the officers who are working in the FSSAI. I mean, of late we have seen there have been very, very frequent changes. So consistency, I think, at the regulatory level is very, very important. And one more thing which I would like to highlight, adding on to the regulatory scenario. I hope all of you are aware of the front of pack labeling regulation which is going to come. I'm not certain if you're aware, but this is going to change the regulatory aspect and the labeling perspective in the country, wherein all the food products are going to be labeled based on their ingredients, how as per the given certain measures or certain targets will be set up for each category. So like you have in India, we are looking at the star rating. So I think that will be the major big haul in the Indian food regulations, and all the companies will have to rework their front of pack labeling regulation accordingly. So I think that would be very, very majorly impacted change in the regulation system.
Thank you. I mean, I agree with both the points that they've made. I mean, just speaking as a lawyer who's advising clients, the question I get sometimes is that, we've been, like a client will come from abroad and they've been selling something abroad for 5 years and they're like, why can't we sell this in India? Why can't we show that we've been selling it safely abroad in, let's say, France for 5 years and nothing's happened, and on that basis, we should be allowed to be sold in India. No, it's not that simple. You have to essentially restart the process once again. But maybe, some sort of more weightage given to, overseas applications, maybe some sort of an equivalence or the adequacy principle with foreign use would be a game changer.
Thank you so much. Such wonderful insights. And we have had such great takeaways from this particular panel. And just to quickly summarize that, it's been, harmonization is one aspect which has come forward. We have to harmonize. We have to advocate for harmonization, or sort of talk about harmonization of regulatory framework in all the countries, or in most of the countries, while keeping in mind that examples of every countries are individuals. For example, Indian products and Indian consumers are different from other countries, and to give weightage to that as well. There have been discussions on comparing the nutritional profile of the conventional meat products with the smart protein products, or rather the opposite of the smart protein products with their conventional counterparts, and I think that's very relevant as well. We have had great insights on labeling and nomenclature and harmonization of that as well, on having an outcome-based lens to the regulatory approach. And with all of that, I would just like to thank the panelists for such an amazing discussion full of insights, takeaways, and action points, which we would love to take forward. People have clearly indicated that they want these products and they want them now. So to act on the regulatory pathways and to collaboratively work towards them, the time is now. And with that, I would just like to end this panel by saying that we have this incredible opportunity to model this industry, keeping consumer safety in mind and ensuring that the regulations are well-rounded and enable innovation now. India cannot be left behind, and we need a strong regulatory framework under the mission for smart protein to advance clear and simplified regulatory pathways to market. Thank you, everyone. Over to you, Shardul.